I'm Rob Forsyth, and this is Liberalism in Question, a series of podcasts from us here at the Centre for Independent Studies, when we examine issues around classical liberalism, its strengths, its weaknesses, its challenges, its opportunities. I'm delighted to welcome to Liberalism in Question Dr. Eamonn Butler, who is a founder and now director of the Adam Smith Institute in England, and a man who is not ashamed, even today, to praise neoliberalism. Eamonn, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Why do you praise neoliberalism when everyone else thinks it's somehow past its day?
Well, one reason is because it really irritates the left when you call yourself a neoliberal, because they think that neoliberalism is responsible from everything from earthquakes and starvation to you name it. So that's one good reason, I think. But I am a neoliberal because the classical liberals had certain ways of looking at the world. But I'm a liberal with a small L, but things have changed, so it's a different world than it was in the 18th century. So we have to have a new form of liberalism, and that's neoliberalism.
I'll come back to that. Let's go back to the beginning. Adam Smith.
Yes.
You chose his name for your think tank.
Indeed.
He was writing at almost the same time as the British were colonising this country, the late 18th century.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about Adam Smith's writing that's still relevant today for you?
Oh, goodness.
And what did he say? I mean, what was the key point that stands up, that why this man should be still regarded as an important thinker for today?
Curiously, it's self-interest, and that human beings are deeply motivated by self-interest. And what you need to do is to capture that and use it. And so Adam Smith created an economic model in which you're harnessing self-interest. And that has led to enormous prosperity. But then equally, he was a philosopher as well. He was a moral philosopher. And there again, he says that we like to be liked by other people. We do things which they like, so we get along quite famously because that makes us feel good because we're social creatures. So that's sort of self-interest as well.
I mean, there were two books. There was the Wealth of Nations, which was his economic, as it were, book, and then the Theory of Moral Sentiments, which
made his fortune.
Which is about how humans. Can I just get back to the Wealth of Nations? On the face of it, selfishness, self-regard, seems a bad thing. How did Smith say that can make us wealthy? And why do you still think that, in a way, this is the energy of prosperity?
Well, this was not a remotely controversial idea in the 18th century, that people knew that in order to survive, you had to have a certain amount of self-interest. I mean, yes, you've got to get along with other people, and as Smith says, we are social beings. He was really a social psychologist more than a philosopher and more than an economist. But we do get along with other people, but it is the haggling in the market, where we're all trying to get the best for ourselves, that actually generates prosperity and efficiency and leads to a dynamic, growing economy.
Rather than the thing being organised from on top.
Yes, absolutely. Well, he specifically says, that the ruler who would try to move individuals across society like you would move chess pieces across a board is getting themselves into a real mess, because you can't do that. And we're not like chess pieces. Each of us has our own motivation. So his view is that a ruler, a monarch authorities should step back and just let people do their own thing, because they know their own circumstances, and they have a disposition, he says, to strive to benefit themselves and their families. So let them get on with it.
But by doing that, the theory is that they'll also benefit others.
Oh, correct.
Unwittingly, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely. It's not from the benevolence of the brewer and the baker that we derive our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. The baker doesn't sell you bread because the baker thinks you're a good egg. The baker sells you bread in order to get a financial reward.
What in Smith's view is the link then between me, I'm a baker, I'm selling my bread, to my bread selling, leading to the increase of wealth of the society I'm in? Yeah. How does it turn from self-focus to results for the rest of people? How does that work?
Well, Smith is actually very interesting on this when he talks about international trade, but it's exactly the same thing in domestic commerce, which is that if you've got two people and they have different values, we all have different values, the wider apart those values are, the easier it is for them to trade things. You've got something that you don't value and that I do.
You mean values in that sense, not values in terms of morality, and different what I value.
Yes, I mean in terms of what does this mean for my life? What am I going to do with it? His view is that exchange actually generates value because you've got something you don't want.
I've got this bread. Yeah. I've got more bread than I can eat.
Yep, I've got more money than I know what to do with.
So why don't we do a deal?
I give you the
have
money.
My bread. Give me the money.
Right, yes, so I've got some bread. That's really great, and you've got some cash.
Money. And
so we're both better off. You see.
The theory, therefore, of people sharing, albeit out of self-interest, creates a greater wealth than if we all just kept everything for ourselves.
Yeah. It's a wonderfully cooperative system. Nobody has to be forced to do any of this. They do it for their own good reasons, and it generates benefit for both sides.
This is why it's called free market.
Yeah.
I think Smith said at one stage that whenever merchants get together, they make plots against the common good. In other words, isn't one of the questions about this, if you have a free market, the powerful will gang up against the weak and get and take over, and that's the problem with your system, with this system.
Read on, Rob, read on. Because after that very famous paragraph, he then goes on to say, what makes these meetings necessary? And the answer is basically it's government regulation. If there's government regulation of the industry, then industry people have to get together in order to just think, well, how do we put this into effect, and so on and so on. And if there's an industry pension scheme is imposed by the government, then they've got to get together. And so what he says is that it is the government which actually makes this worse.
Makes it worse?
Oh yes, it makes it much worse because the government basically its interventions mean that business people then do get together, and that ends up in a conspiracy against the public. Yes, of course.
That is.
It is a problem actually for liberals, and Milton Friedman, of course, pointed this out, that business people are very much in favour of free markets, except in their own industry, where they want controls and regulations.
Yes, I'm aware that being a classical liberal does not mean you're necessarily pro-business; you're pro-market.
Exactly,
and
yes,
often,
right. Yeah. I'm not in this for the boss classes,
No, in fact, you are a great fan of. I'll jump ahead for a minute. You're a great fan of the Margaret Thatcher, and I think you made a point somewhere, if I remember correctly. She was not for the Tories in a strange sense, though she was a Tory party. She was actually someone who was trying to liberate people against some of the power of big business and big government, as well as as trade union movements.
Yes, that's right. Of course, her father ran a small shop up in the northeast of England, and so she got into the understanding of how you run a small business, and running a country is not really very much different because the books have got a balance at the end of the day.
But I understand your point about government rules create what I'll call, I think, the seekers of rent.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But surely, even left to itself, a market, we're not equal in ability, we're not equal in capacity. Power is not equally distributed.
Well,
there must be a centralisation of power, and people will force their opponents out so they can get destroy the kind of competition, become a monopoly. Surely that's a weakness. A monopoly, that's a weakness in a free market.
Elon Musk has a great deal of economic power, but he can't put me in jail because he doesn't approve of what I say. The government can do that. And so this is the beauty of a market-based system, that power is dispersed. Whereas if you have a socialist system, power is concentrated, and it carries on getting more and more concentrated. And those guys can put you in jail, and they can execute you, and they can create wars against you and things.
I take that point, actually, that even you made a point somewhere, even taxation is based upon compulsion.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Unlike other forms of spending money when I choose to spend it on what I want to buy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why you believe in small taxation, because it's compulsion.
Well, I'm generally against any tax of any size for any reason at any time. But
Well, look, surely, Eamonn, there must be some rules to guarantee the market stays free against monopolies, against false advertising, against things that break the fraud, against all things that go on that can cause a breakdown in this ideal market you're talking about.
Yes,
you
absolutely.
need the government for that, surely.
Yeah, I always say that you need a fire basket to contain the fire. You need a system of rules, and that is a system like justice. Rules of doing things, property, contract, and so on and so on. So once you've got those things, basically liberal values in place, then the fire will continue to grow and keep you warm. So that's really what we're looking at. And of course, many people on the left say, oh, well, there's no such thing as a free market because there's got to be government rules all over the place. You see, any market is hindered by government rules. Therefore, you guys are old-fashioned and we should have more rules. That's not true at all. I mean, yes, you might need some rules to keep the free market working, but don't go beyond that. Don't then say, yeah, well, the government should intervene here.
So is one of the challenges work out what those rules are, positive rules, versus when they become dysfunctional. The great challenge is to work out when a government is going too far and not far enough.
Well, yes, I think.
Or is that fairly straightforward?
Well, I mean, certainly Smith would say it's a pretty modest intervention as long as you've got. Well, he famously wrote to somebody and said that nothing is required to take a country from barbarism to prosperity than peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. And he's not exactly wrong,
Could you do the reverse, by the way, to bring it down, from prosperity to penury?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes. Well, if you have no justice, then you're going to get poverty. There's no question about it.
Or government's overdoing. I mean, one of the roles of government is to have monopoly of violence to protect.
Yes.
There are things like that. You're not defending a anarchist state, of course. A true liberal believes in government, but at a limited level.
Yes. I think this is a problem for liberals. I've always thought that a liberal is not an anarchist, it's not laissez-faire. No. It's, there needs to be some rules of justice and honesty, property, all of that sort of stuff. So basically, where do you stop? And it's so easy. In fact, even if you look at Hayek, who you think, well,
the great theorist of the last century.
Absolutely, Road to Serfdom and Constitutional Liberty and so on. And even he says, well, of course, you need government to be involved in emergency provision, and you need it to be involved in the defence and security, and maybe you need a welfare system for people who are unfortunate and so on.
Yes.
And of course, once you start conceding all these things, I think liberals do have a problem because where do you stop? And I think that's a.
But they don't have another problem, Eamonn, in this. If I have a problem, there are many problems in our society. The thought, if only the government could do something about it, seems much more an easy answer.
Oh yes.
Than what you're proposing is just have the rules, and somehow people will, by their own cooperation and energy and creativity, will solve it themselves. That doesn't strike me as an exciting prospect compared to let the government make a rule to fix it.
I think it's a very exciting prospect because it is what has delivered prosperity across the planet. And if you look at countries that do take that kind of attitude, they're hugely growing and rich and plenty of travel and fashion and you name it. And the ones that don't.
I'm not denying that the truth of that. I'm saying it's harder to motivate people, be motivated towards it.
Yes, well, I think we do have a sort of older brain that is, as Hayek says, that evolved in small groups, and an easy sort of socialism arise, and that's still, very deeply ingrained in our minds, I think. So it's difficult to get people to see this, and you have to say, well, yeah, the government could intervene, but that's going to cause all sorts of other problems.
In fact, you put your finger on an issue which I think he mentioned in many of his books about the rise of liberal democracy. There's a way in which to think as a family, community, care for others, is different to think about a society. Mm-hmm. In a society, I trade with strangers. Right? All today I've had lunch, I've done this, done that. I've spoken to people I don't really know. They're So
Yes.
the art of a good liberal society is I learn how to trust and trade with strangers, which is very different from my family, who I'm acting out of filial obligations.
Yes.
And the distinction is often hard for people to transfer from family.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think he holds that liberal democracy required the breakdown of some of the powers of family.
Yes, there's a number of people on
The
the left.
barons in England versus, think of going right back in history.
A number of people on the left say this. They say that, wouldn't it be so much better if, like a family going to the beach, right? Okay, you bring the swimming kit and you bring the buckets and spade, and then you can cook the barbecue and so on. So everybody has their plans. But the trouble is, once you try and do that on a larger scale, you've had it, because nobody can absorb the information that is needed to run an entire society. There's just too much, and it changes too quickly to process.
That's a very important point. I believe that something that Friedrich von Hayek made a great point of.
Oh yes.
The problem of information in a society. Can I back that a little further? I think it's a very important point.
Yes. It's information is dispersed. It's partial. Quite a bit of it is wrong, and so how do you make decisions? I always think, consider a real estate agent, somebody selling property. Well, you could say, well, let's have a government system, and the government will decide, the price of properties and so on. And
some are proposing this in this country, by the way. But carry on.
Well, there you are. And it could be that local people could feed up information about how things have changed and what that might do to property values and so on. Up to some central authority.
Yes.
But by the time that the information has even got there, it's going to be out of date. Things will have changed. And whose information do you rely on? It's, different people see things in different ways. So, one person might think, oh, this development is fantastic. It's going to increase the price of property, and somebody else in this locality, and somebody else might think, no, it's going to depress it. Who do you believe?
This is where prices prices are kind of information givers, is that right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And that further.
Yeah, Hayek talks about the signalling effect.
Signalling of pricing.
Prices. So
now, there have been times in the human history where people have tried the other system, the late Soviet Union, for example, where you have a top-down government controls all means of production and in fact tries to run the country through a bureaucracy rather than through the freedom of price signals.
Yeah.
How did that work out?
Not too well.
Started okay, perhaps. In emergencies.
No, it didn't even start too well.
Oh, right, okay.
Look, socialist experiments have not been driven by grassroots people. They've been driven by political elites, and that was certainly true in the Soviet Union. And it was them with a sort of intellectual vision as to how society should be organised, and of course they were going to be the people who organised it. Rather than something which came up through workers' revolutionary movements or anything like that. So, so it started like that, and they pretty quickly found out that in order to actually impose this system, you had to coerce people, and you had to say, right, well, you're going in jail because you criticise the system. We can't have people criticising.
Or because you had your own little farm, you sold things.
Or whatever. Yeah, that's right.
Is that inevitable in a socialist system, compulsion?
Oh yes, absolutely. The whole system is based on compulsion. That's the difference. The free market system is based on voluntary cooperation. You're not forced to exchange with other people, not forced to go into a shop. Whereas in the socialist system, yes, you are forced to live where you're told to live, work where you're told to work, you do what you're told to do.
Now, both in this country and in yours, in the 1980s, late 70s, there was a liberation of the economies. There was, in Australia, we floated our dollar.
Yes.
We deregulated a lot of the industrial relations. There was a whole reduction of tariffs. In other words, we let competition really come into our country. Short term, there were some real problems. I'll come back there in a moment. But let's talk about the problems first. This caused dislocation, and certainly in the United Kingdom, under Prime Minister Thatcher, the whole coal industry being closed down.
Yes.
Massive dislocation.
Yes.
And social unrest,
yes.
which can give these changes a bad name.
Yes.
What do you say to that?
Well, it's very easy to make fish soup out of an aquarium, but it's quite difficult to make an aquarium out of fish soup. And once you have a socialist system in which there's no pricing, decisions are all made politically rather than through prices, through demand, and so on. Once you've got that, and you've got all the institutions there, dismantling them and creating something else is an extremely difficult process. And you've seen absolute disasters in Russia, for example, when after the Berlin Wall came down and so on, and it's awful. It's not easy to do. I mean, in the UK, we tried to find other jobs for people who'd been displaced and sources of capital, so that people who'd been displaced could raise money and start businesses and things like that. And that was to some extent quite successful. But we couldn't have gone on subsidising our existing businesses, because I mean, coal, for example, was losing £1 million a day. It was cheaper to buy coal from Australia and ship it out to Britain than it was to dig it out of South Wales.
What exactly is the problem with that?
Yes, I can see that.
I can't see the problem with that.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
In fact, the price of change is often high, but people forget the price of not changing, if I could put it that way, the disease and the cure. If the revolution of privatisation is a cure, it's going to hurt.
Well,
it's not as, it's like a medicine hurts you, radiotherapy hurts you, compared to this. Is that a fair analogy of what you're talking about?
Yes. You see, I think if the government keeps out of the road, the economy changes naturally. Technology develops and blah, 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 blah. What happens when government gets involved is too often they try to freeze things the way they are. So we can't change, we can't have this new technology because it's going to put people out of work. So then you freeze. So the choice is either a nice smooth progression like that, or a sudden disruption, and then you've got to do something else, and another sudden disruption.
When the government thing fails, in fact,
yes,
fails.
exactly.
Now, one of the reasons why neoliberalism is no longer a positive word is because of, well, firstly, why do you think, I'll give them what I think. Today, you'll admit, despite your happy championing of the term, the world is no longer that keen on privatisation, small government, liberalisation of tariffs, things that you believe produces a better world for us. But they're on the nose. Why? What has happened?
Do you think it ever has been?
Why not?
We've always opposed these things.
Why do we oppose what's good for us? Well, why is this?
I think it's our innate socialism, as I say. It's part of the human brain that we think, wouldn't it be nice if we all cooperated and so on. Well, we do cooperate through the market in a very dynamic way. So I think that's
but something
it's kind of natural.
But I'm thinking about the global financial crisis of 2008-9, for example.
Yeah.
Many people put the kind of revolution that occurred under Thatcher and under Hawke Keating and Howard and our place on the nose. It's a sign of liberalism, neoliberalism gone mad, privatisation gone too far, individualism without thinking of the community. That's what people said. Has not the global financial crisis dented the liberal or neoliberal program?
Yes, but you have to look behind these things and see what was actually going on. What was actually going with the financial crisis, for example, is that President Carter in 1977 forced banks to lend to customers in cities that they didn't really want to lend to because they thought they were bad risks, and it was all done for the best of intentions. And so the banks knew that they were making bad loans. They were being forced to do that by the regulators.
A bad loan is a loan that you won't get repaid.
Yeah,
basically.
And Bill Clinton in the 90s toughened that even further. And then the banks started to take these loans, dice them, slice them, sell them to London, and nobody knew what they were buying. And eventually the mortgage market in America went splat, and that spilled out into the whole world. When you've got when you're in a casino and the government's giving out free chips, and the regulator is buying drinks at the bar, I mean, you're going to get a problem.
But there were some companies which were misbehaving badly, right? There were companies and banks that were they not? The Lehman, I'm thinking.
Yes, but
I'd not be sued for saying this, but Lehman Brothers and others, there's regarded as greed. The whole greedy is good story gave the notion of people greedily preying on others. That's not true.
Well, if we'd had a proper free market, that wouldn't be the case, because we'd have more competition. There's very little competition. I mean, we've only had one new high street bank been created in the UK since 1840. right? Because the regulation on banks is so onerous that you can't really do it. What you need in banking is competition. And we wouldn't have had all the financial crises that we've had if we had proper competition in banking. So, but when you have regulation, banks get bigger and bigger,
yes,
and then they get too big to fail. So the government's got to bail them out.
I'm going to say, when you have free enterprise banks, you do get banks failing. You do get people losing their money. The government in Australia has guaranteed our deposits, so we can't lose our money. I believe. I think I've got that right.
But yes, but you know what I'd say is that, right, if you've got lots of different people doing lots of different things, and one of those enterprises doesn't work, that's a small problem, right? You can deal with that, okay? And it may be if people are disadvantaged from that and there's hardship as a result, well, you know, maybe the government can step in and do something about that. If you've got enormous enterprises, because only enormous enterprises can deal with all the regulation that's on them, and they fail, then that's a major problem. If you've got an economy that's entirely run by the government and that fails, that is a real problem.
So you say that in fact behind the failures which are often blamed on neoliberalism was the fact that the world wasn't liberal enough.
Yes, absolutely.
The governments were constraining free decisions, and that created an unnatural phenomenon. Finally, that crunch that you mentioned occurs.
It was entirely the product of regulation in the United States.
There you go. Now, you said that we're naturally social as a kind of original sin, you almost, that we're naturally, because I want to ask you about because if you're right, and I'm inclined to agree with you, it means that what's really good for us as a people, as a society, is very hard for us to see and put into practice.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're always trying to, we propose policies and so on, and people come up and say, oh, that's terrible, you know, that's, it's not sort of nice and cuddly, feely and socialist and all of that kind of stuff. And we have to explain, why do you want to do that? I mean, take things like the minimum wage, for example, right? Well, the minimum wage is introduced for arguably noble reasons, although the trade unions had something to do with it, but noble reasons of making sure that nobody has to survive on very low wages. But the trouble is that that simply prices some people out of work. If you're a recent immigrant, perhaps you don't understand the language, you might be disabled, you might be young, you haven't got the habits of work. You can't get a job at all because the minimum wage is up there, and you might be willing to work for much less, but you can't do it, and this guy can't offer you a job. So that actually is bad for the very groups that you're trying to help. And you've got to explain that sort of thing to people.
I mean, one of the lessons of economics and of neoliberalism is that despite, tragically, good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes.
Yes, well, that's right, yes.
In fact, sometimes the opposite. Well-intentioned may be disastrous. This is a rather shocking thing to find out. We always think that if you mean well, it'll turn out well.
Well, you know, Hayek used to say, you know, don't attribute bad motives to people. You know, we're all trying to produce a better society. It's just that you've got to think through the implications of what it is that you're proposing.
Which means that a liberal understanding, and this may have been, well, thank goodness people like Adam Smith had to try and explain this, being slightly counterintuitive. This requires a kind of leadership from our political leaders to explain to people what actually will work for them, not what people would like to have.
Yes. Well, if you leave it up to political leaders, I don't think you're going to get anywhere. It's up to people
think tanks like yours and mine.
Absolutely, that's right. You know, those can explain it, and journalists can explain it, and so on. Politicians basically follow that.
We have had in Australia one or two. I thought that as Treasurer, Paul Keating tried to educate us.
Yes.
I think that in their own way, so did the Howard Costello government. But it does take people in explaining what's best for them, which may often take a bit of thinking because, as I said, it doesn't seem natural that by having less organisation, less regulation, in the long term, you'll have better outcomes than trying to run things from the top.
You know, the evidence is so obvious. I can't understand why people don't see it. You look at places like Venezuela and so on, and I knew what was going to happen there. Well, it's happened, right?
Well, you've taken away my last question, which was, If it's so obvious, why aren't people seeing it? But you don't know. I'll ask another one.
Well, I think the trouble is in economics that you can always produce another reason as to why this turned out.
Well, let me ask you this question, and this is my kind of final question. I'd love to talk much further, but thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Are you optimistic about the future of liberal democracy, liberal societies, despite the present fact that at the moment there's a bit of a wind going the other way? But are you basically thinking truth will out?
Oh yes, I think so. And I think also that young people in particular, they don't want to be pushed around by governments. You know, they want to go out and make their own way and become millionaires at the age of 25 or whatever it is. So I think that there's a lot of, it's the older folks that I think are the problem, and certainly the professors are the problem. The students aren't the problem.
So once again, it's us boomers, you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Well, on that somewhat disturbing note, I want to thank you very much, Dr. Eamonn Butler from the Adam Smith Institute in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for your helpful insights.
You're welcome. That's
one of the issues here for the Liberalism question, the questions of liberalism in all its challenges. I'm Rob Forsyth. Thank you for watching.